Good morning. We're going to begin now a Sichah in Chelik Tes Zayin. Sichah Hey. This is part of the project Likkutei Sichos. And in order to properly understand the Sichah, just want to explain today's Chitas and today's Chumash. The Torah starts off telling us about the Menorah. And the Torah says, "Vasisim Menorah Zov Torah." You shall make the Menorah of pure gold. The Menorah has to be miksha. It has to be hammered work. Te'osa ha-Menorah. You shall make the Menorah Yerecha, V'kona Gviel, Kafteirel, Ufrochel Mimeno Yu. Its base, its stems, its goblets, its knobs, its flowers shall all be in one piece. Rashi says, what does it mean, miksha te'osa ha-Menorah? The Menorah shall be hammered work. So Rashi says, Shalei Asenu Chulyos. It should not be made in sections, which can be removed. And its branches and its lamps should not be individually made and then attached. As the customs of smiths, through the process, it's called in Old French, shuldir, and what the Torah is telling us that it has to be miksha, it has to be hammered out. You can't just make sections and connect them together, attach them together afterwards. Rashi says, "Elakuloi bo mechaticha achas." The Menorah has to come and be constructed entirely from one piece of gold. Umakish bekornis v'choisich b'kli ha'umonis u'marfet hakonim elech ve'elech, and it should be beaten with a hammer and cut with a tool, and the branches separated on both sides. So we see that the Menorah has to be miksha, has to be hammered out. You can't just make different sections and glue them together or attach them together. There's another din in the Menorah also, that the Menorah has to be also come from kikar. The weight of the Menorah has to be a kikar of weight. And all the neiros and the Menorah and all the ornaments and the kalim that come from the Menorah have to be from this kikar. So hold these two thoughts, and with this we'll begin the Sichah. Okay, we're just starting now, page 322. Terumah Hey. Yeah, yes, the. Okay. In them oifen asiyas haneres from the Menorah, in the way that the neres over here means the on top of the branches of the Menorah there was a cup of the Menorah. And in this cup, that's where they place the oil and the wicks. So in regards to these neres, in regards to these lamps, there's a machlekes in the Gemara. So there's a machlekes in the Gemara in Menachos. Daf Peiches amid beis. What's the machlekes? So he brings down late ein deas and the neres given a tail from the Menorah. According to one opinion, the lamps were a part of the Menorah. This that the Torah says, which we just read, has to be hammered out. Unit prokim mamish. It cannot be in different sections. Is koil oich. It includes as well also the actual candles, the place where they place the candle, where they place the oil. Is a second opinion is that as the neres and given a bazundre zach from the Menorah, that the candles, where they placed the candles, was something separate from the Menorah. Before they would actually light it, they would place the neres on the Konei Menorah. On the Seder von Atovas Nika neres given, and the way that they cleaned the neres was, as Mesalkon, they would remove from on top of the Menorah, they would remove the neres, and they would place it in the tent and clean it. So that's the simple machlekes. The simple machlekes is, if the neres, the place where they put the oil and the wicks, was that part of the Menorah? In other words, when the Torah says miksha, it's hammered out also on top of the Menorah? Or was it a separate piece that they would place it on the actual cup, like a cover? So he says in the Gemara, "Farbintes mit der Plukse," and the Gemara connects this with the machlekes. Sie das, was steht bei der Menorah. This that the Menorah says, it says in regards to the Menorah, Kikar Zov, Torah Yasa Isa, Kol HaKelim Eila, that from the Menorah and also the Kelim have to all be from this Kikar Zov. Meint Oich the Neres doesn't mean also the Neres. As Oich Zei Bois Mena Kikar, that also the Neres also have to come from the Kikar. And therefore they were hammered out. In other words, like this. The Torah says that the Menorah has to be Miksha, has to be hammered out. You can't put it in compartments. The Torah also says that the Menorah has to be Kikar Zov Tar. And also the Eskol HaKelim Eila have to come from the Kikar Zov. So the question is, does it go hand in hand? If the fact that the Torah says that it has to be, that everything has to come from the Kikar, and the Torah has to say, and the Torah also says that it's Miksha, so does it go hand in hand? The fact that it's Miksha, so anything that's part of the Kikar is also Miksha. So if the Kelim are coming from the Kikar, and it has to be Miksha, that means that anything that's part of the Menorah also has to be Miksha. So according to that opinion, he's going to say that the Neres on top of the Menorah were also hammered out. It wasn't a separate piece, a separate entity. Other, nor the Menorah Alein is Ba Min HaKikar. Or do I say no? You're right. Everything taka comes from the Kikar Zov, but aber nicht die Neres und the Fizes and the Neres nicht given Miksha. Or do I say that only the Menorah comes from the Kikar, but the Neres is not part of the Miksha. Okay, so he says like this: the Rambam paskins the halacha, Meneda haba zov, tia kulei Kikar im Neresah, but tia kulei Miksha. So the Rambam says that when the Menorah is produced from gold, its total weight, including the lamps, shall be 1 Kikar. Im Neresah v'tia kulei Miksha. All of them have to be embedded, have to be hammered out. And he says, Shaneder is kvuin b'Menorah v'hem mechlal HaKikar. The lamps were embedded in the Menorah and were included in the Kikar of gold, which the entire Menorah was made. So what do I see? That the Rambam paskins, la halacha, that the actual Neres were embedded in the actual Menorah. It was part of, the Neres were part of the actual Menorah. Now, the Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe is going to tell us a fascinating, how to learn Rashi. Rashi sometimes, usually you would think that if the Gemara paskins this way, Rashi is going to usually go with the Gemara. But Rashi is always Pshudish Mikra, and the Rebbe is going to teach us that when you learn Rashi, even though Rashi is always the simple pshat of the pasuk, which lav dafka that will go according to halacha. So let's see. Shein Geret Filmo, we spoke about it many times. As Rashi Pirush al Teira is mefarish al derech pshat. Rashi always explains the simple pshat. Afilu when it's nit masim mit chelek halacha shabatera, even though it doesn't necessarily fit with the halacha of Torah. In other words, the way we paskin. Und das zet man bei even beilet in shitas Pirush b'nidedan. And we see this also in his explanation in our case. Wie gesagt, as we said, verbinde Gemara die Pluksa zineres davon sein Miksha mit der Menorah. So the Gemara connects the fact that the Neres have to be hammered out with the Menorah with their Pluksa tzizizan and bois menakikar. As we mentioned before, there's a machlekes in the Gemara Menachos. If the Neres have to be beaten with the Menorah, or is it something separate? And the Gemara connects this with the machlekes. If I say that it comes that when the Torah says bois menakikar, does it mean also the Neres or only the Menorah without the Neres? So he says like this. When the Ramban says like this: Al das kulam, everybody agrees that la yava b'mishkal hakikar ela guf hameneda b'mashu ima miksha. According to everybody agrees that when the Torah says that the weight of the Menorah has to be a kikar, it means the actual guf of the Menorah, and that's what has to be hammered out. When the fires are masber different than Ramban explains, as later they, according to the opinion in Brisa of the Melachas Mishkan, in Brisa of Melachas Mishkan, as the malkalchaim, which means the tongues, or the machtes and the shovels, bois menakikar. So you're saying like this. You're saying that the Menorah has to come from this kikar, and also the kalim also have to come from this kikar. So the Ramban says that according to the opinion that holds the Bryce and Lechas of Mishkan, that the Malkachayim and the Machtes also have to come from this kikar. So therefore, if they're part of if they have to come from the kikar, so they can't be separate entities from the Meneda. Nor tell from the Meneda, they're part of the Meneda. Malkachayim, what's Malkachayim? So he explains that the Malkachayim is going to be like something that they made on top of the candles, like a plate of gold on top of the candles. Machtes, what's Machtes? This is like a base under each candle. In other words, the Ramban explains that if you're saying that the Torah says that the menorah has to be mikshah, has to be hammered out, it has to be one piece, and you're saying also that the kalim have to be also part from the kikar, so it goes haynuhach. If it's mikshah, if it's hammered out, and it comes from the kikar, that means that the kalim have to also be hammered out. Now, if so, how do you explain tongues, which are malkachayim, and he says malkachayim, or so I think he says machtes. So usually I touch up malkachayim means the tongues, and the machtes is the shovels. Tongues and shovels are not part of the. They can't be part of the menorah because they're separate. So therefore, the Ramban says that's not what malkachayim and machtes means. It means something else. Now the Rebbe says Rashi says Pirusha of kikar zovtar. Rashi says on the explanation that the menorah has to be from the weight has to be a kikar zov. So he says shelo yiyeh mishkala im kol kela ela kikar. That the weight has to be a kikar. Or for them taich there, and therefore he says like this. Umalkecha, what's malkecha? Hey matzvasim. This is the tongues. Umachtesa, what's machtes? Im kimin bezichin ketanim shechoyse behem. This is like a small, like smallish bowl. Like it was like a type of shovel that you raked the menorah. Kumteis ledaites echti kelim hanifradim for the menorah zayin for them kikar. So it comes out that according to Rashi on Pshutisha Mikra, the kelim which are separated from the menorah, as we know, the malkachad, that a tongue and a shovel is separated from the menorah, yet Rashi is going to hold that it still comes from the kikar zov. So basically, like this, the Ramban is going to learn that if everything comes from the kikar, that means everything that comes from the kikar, the menorah, has to be mikshah. If it has to be mikshah, that means everything has to be hammered out and attached to the menorah. So therefore, you're going to have to explain malkachayim and machtes as not a tongue or a shovel, but a entity that's part of the menorah that you could have hammered out. Rashi is going to say it's two separate things. The fact that that the menorah and the kelim have to come from the kikar, fine. It can still come from the kikar and you can separate it. The menorah has to be hammered out, but you can still have kelim that come from the kikar that's not part of the actual menorah. And he explains, V'tami Shloimy. Why does Rashi explain this? The Pirush HaPosha fun Aleph Malkachayim Mamachte. What's the simple explanation of Malkachayim Mamachte? Become Mekemis the Tanakh is that clean nifruk from the Zach by Vacher Menutzes Dugma by the Mizbeach. If you touch up simple Tanakh, Malkachayim Mamachte are the kelim like a tongue and a shovel that was used. It's a separate utensil that was used in the Mizbeach. And Beis Kikar Zov Tar Yasa Isa. What does it say? The menorah has to be a kikar zov tar yasa isa as kol hakelim ela, all these kelim is as oisa. So if you are medayik in the words oisa the menorah when kol hakelim ela ala kelim was vern der mont in pasuk dafür gemacht vern from der kikar zov tar. So it comes out is that the menorah and all the kelim with it have to be made from the kikar zov. Apiza, according to this, so now that we explained that according to Rashi, the miksha, this that the menorah has to be hammered out, and the fact that the menorah has to be a kikar zov tar, it's not codependent. Kumteis comes out. As for them, was the nearest hamagadav zayin from them kikar is the shitose nit kinei chachaz yamagamu zayin miksha mit the menorah. So again, the fact that the nearest had to be, as we explained, the neiros, which are part of the kelim of the Mikdash, have to be from the kikar. So just because it has to be from the kikar, lav dafka, the Rebbe is saying, doesn't mean that the neiros, the lamps on the menorah, were also hammered out. So the Rebbe says like this, Gimel. At first glance, you see, as Rashi halt as the tzivei miksha by menorah is kela ichteris. If you look in Rashi, he's going to hold that the commandment that the menorah has to be hammered out means also the candles on the menorah have to be hammered out. Because he says like this: "If miksha te'osa menorah," on this that the Torah says that the menorah has to be hammered out, is Rashi Mefarish, which we read in the beginning of this year. You should not make like different holes. You should not make the branches and the neiros in different parts. And then afterwards connect them. Rather, they all come. All the menorah comes from one piece of gold. And then, as you have this block of gold, you carve out the konim. Now, so now the Rashi says that you're not allowed to make it in different sections and then connect them together. So the Rashi is telling, as the neiros so if you read Rashi in a very bashkaf rishayna, in the first class, you say that Rashi clearly says that you can't take the menorah in different parts and connect them together. Rather, you have to take the block of gold and carve it out and hammer it out to get to where you need to get to. So l'cheira, I would say that the neiros, which are part of the kelim, have to be miksha. Rashi clearly says it. The Rabbi says, when you go and you're medayik in Rashi's words, is just nit mukhrach. Navdafka, that's the pshat. Rashi zoknar, what does Rashi say? Miksha te'asa hamenedah. That the Torah says that you have to make the menorah hammered out, is shalol. So what does that negate? As the menorah zol nit zayin an eifim von evonim evonim. You can't make the menorah in a way of different parts and then and then afterwards connect them. This means the menorah darf nit zayin zunuf geklept von der besondere Teilung, which means that the menorah cannot be made from different parts and then afterwards connect them. When in Demzok Rashi, what does Rashi say? As punkt v'di konei menorah haben nit getort zayin evonim evonim v'achar bikim. That just like the actual branches of the menorah, you cannot make separate branches and then bring them together. So you cannot now connect the neiros, the candles, to the menorah. Then it comes out that the menorah is not one piece. But this, that the neiros could now be a separate entity to the menorah, rather we're placing it on the heads of the konim. Rashi is not talking about. When them oifen is doch the menorah miksha. So now the menorah is still miksha. It's from one place. So it's going to double to the menorah. There's nothing connected to the menorah. He says, and based on this, will be understood when Rashi mentions only the konim and not the neiros. So the Rebbe says like this. Even though you're reading Rashi, the Rashi l'chayra says that everything has to be hammered out, it can't be connected. But what Rashi is saying is not. What Rashi is saying is like this: the neiros of the menorah, you're not allowed to go and connect them and glue them to the menorah. But Rashi is not talking about that if you want to place them on the menorah, in other words, not connect them. Rashi doesn't say it's not allowed. What the Rebbe is trying to bring out is that according to Rashi, the neiros and the rest of the menorah is two separate things. That even though the Ramban is going to end up Rambam Paskins Halacha, that the neiros was part of the menorah, in other words, to hammer it out, Rashi is going to learn Pshudah Shemikra, and the Rebbe is going to bring different echachas, that according to Rashi, even though the menorah has to be miksha, and the neiros went on the menorah, nevertheless, the neiros was not actually connected to the menorah. In other words, it wasn't part of the hammered out. Dalet. In Pirush Rashi v'zayin shita is in them, since we don't see clearly what Rashi's opinion is. If them any idea, he doesn't say I don't know. Usually when he doesn't know pshat, he says any idea. He says in other places, when the explanation is not clear. Darfin we have to say, as in limud pshat, this is azay pashit. When you read pshat, it's so simple. As Rashi darfis nit oistaichin in zayin pirish, that Rashi doesn't have to explain it because it's so simple in pshat. Is that this often clear in the psukim alayin? You see this clearly in the psukim. So the Rabbi says, is there beer in them? What's the explanation? The Seder and Pashas from Lachas HaMenera is, what's the order of how the Menera was made? First the Torah says, V'asisa Menera Zov, Miksha, which we read in the beginning, the Menera has to be gold, it has to be hammered out, Yerecha V'kono Gviel Kaftero Frachel Mimena Yu, that it has the base and the branches and the goblets and all these and the flowers, they all have to be hammered out. Fine. Then afterwards, the Torah explains how you make the konei amneda. What is Messiah? And then the pasuk concludes, the Torah says all these parts of the menera have to be all hammered out. And then the Torah says, Shiva, that the neder should be 7, and also the tongues and the shovels, kikar zov dov tar v'geimer. It should be from the kikar zov. When Azaych in Pashas Vayakol was v'detzelt v'mehot gemacht v'neder bepeil stein the ale pratim mitten zelber seder. And if you look in Pashas Vayakol, it says the same thing. First, it tells you about the menera, then it tells you the branches of the menera, tells you about the goblets of the menera, and they all have to be mimena you. It all has to be miksha. And then the Torah says that it has to be 7 branches. And the malkichel, machteisel, have to all come from the kikar. Now, the Rebbe says like this. For them, was the tzivi was says nerisel steht noch die pratim. Von der Asiya von Gufa Menera und noch in tzivi kula miksha achas. So the fact that the commandment that you should make the neres. When does it say you should make the neres of the menera? After all the details of the Gufa Menera, and the Torah says that when it comes to the Gufa Menera, you should make it kula miksha achas. Then what does the Torah tell me? The Torah says the different commandments, tells me the commandments of the neiros. So the Rebbe says, let's move on. As loy pshutei shel mikra, if you learn Pashta Pshat, derech pirish Rashi la Torah, seine neiros bazundre zachen was gehört nicht zum Guf HaMenera. It comes out that the candles, the neiros of the Menera, were separate from the actual Guf of the Menera. It was in the same category as the tongues and the shovels, on gleich, which we say after the Nereser. So what the Rebbe is saying is just look and push the words. The Torah says about the Menera, it says all these details about the Menera, and then the Torah says, you should make the Neres 7. If the Neres is part of the Menera, so why not say all the details of the Menera and the Neres, and then say Miksha Achas? Must be, the Rebbe says, that Rashi is learning that the Miksha Achas is not going on the Neres. Just like the Torah says about the Malkisel, Machteisel, which we know it's impossible for it to be Miksha Achas. And the Torah says, Vasisas Neresah, after all the details of the Menera, after it tells me Miksha Achas, Pashta Pshat is that the actual Neres are not a Miksha Achas, it was not hammered out.